The sun hung low over the dusty horizon, painting the vast Montana territory in hues of amber and gold as Abram Nolan spotted her from atop his chestnut mare. In the distance, a woman with a swollen belly struggled with a shovel, attempting to break the hard earth in what was clearly becoming a grave. Even from 50 yards away, he could see the exhaustion etched into every movement of her body, the way she paused frequently to wipe her brow and support her back. It was 1876, a harsh year following a brutal winter, and this stretch of territory between settlements was no place for anyone to be alone, least of all a woman in her condition. The woman didn't notice his approach until his horse's hooves thudded close enough to send vibrations through the ground. She startled, gripping her shovel like a weapon, wild fear in her eyes as she turned to face him. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse from either crying or thirst, perhaps both. Abram raised his hands slowly, making himself as non-threatening as a 6'2" cowboy could. "Madam, I don't mean any harm." His eyes traveled from her face, beautiful, despite the dirt and dried tears, to her pregnant belly, and finally to the makeshift grave she was struggling to dig. Beside it lay a body wrapped in a blood-stained blanket. "My husband," she said, following his gaze. "Fever took him 3 days ago. I've been trying to—" Her voice broke. Abram dismounted carefully, keeping his movements slow. "You'll rest. I'll finish," he said simply, reaching for the shovel. For a moment she looked as if she might refuse, pride warring with exhaustion on her face. Then her shoulders slumped, and she relinquished the tool. "Thank you," she whispered. "Abram Nolan," he offered, taking the shovel and beginning to dig where she had started. The earth was hard-packed from weeks without rain. "Zarah Reed," she replied, easing herself down onto a nearby rock. "My husband was Thomas. We were headed to Oregon." Abram nodded, respecting the man, with each shovelful of dirt he removed. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Reed." As he dug, the sky's fiery colors deepened, and Zarah told him in halting sentences how Thomas had developed a cough just outside of Bozeman. They'd pushed on, hoping to reach the next settlement, but the cough had turned to fever, and the fever had consumed him. She'd been traveling alone with his body for nearly a day, determined to give him a proper burial before continuing west. "West?" Abram paused, leaning on his shovel. "Alone? In your condition?" "I have nowhere to turn back to," she answered simply. "Thomas's brother has a homestead outside Portland. It's all I have left." By the time Abram had dug deep enough, night was falling. Together, they lowered Thomas's body into the grave. Zarah spoke soft words of farewell, while Abram stood respectfully with his hat against his chest. Then he filled the grave as she watched, her face illuminated by the lantern he'd taken from his saddlebag. "You can't travel at night," Abram said when he'd finished. "I'll make camp. You need rest." When she looked uncertain, he added, "My intentions are honorable, Mrs. Reed. I was raised right by a good mother who'd tan my hide from beyond the grave if I disrespected a lady in distress." That earned the smallest smile from her. "I haven't slept properly in days," she admitted. Abram built a fire and prepared a simple meal from his provisions. As they ate, he learned that Zarah was 23, 6 months with child, and had married Thomas Reed just a year ago after meeting him when he delivered mail to her father's general store in Ohio. Thomas had been full of dreams about Oregon's fertile valleys and had painted pictures of a beautiful future that had won her heart. "He was so certain we'd make it," she said softly. "So certain our child would be born in our own home, on our own land." Abram didn't speak his thoughts that Thomas Reed had been a fool to bring his pregnant wife on such a dangerous journey, but something of his opinion must have shown on his face. "He didn't know I was with child when we set out," Zarah said defensively. "I only told him once we were already weeks into the journey. He wanted to turn back, but I insisted we continue." Her hands rested protectively on her stomach. "This was our dream. Is our dream still?" Abram nodded slowly. "The road ahead isn't easy." "Nothing worth having comes easy, Mr. Nolan." The next morning, Abram woke first and had coffee brewing by the time Zarah stirred. She looked better after a night's rest, though still pale and drawn. "I'm headed to Fort Benton," Abram said, as they broke their fast with jerky and hardtack. "I've got business there, but it's only about 4 days' ride. There's a decent doctor, supplies, and you could rest before deciding your next move. He hesitated. If you'd allow me to escort you. Zarah studied him with eyes the color of summer sage. Why would you do that for a stranger? Because my mother raised me right, he replied, the same answer he'd given the night before. Then, more honestly, and because I couldn't live with myself if I left you out here alone. After a moment's consideration, Zarah nodded. Thank you, Mr. Nolan. I accept your offer. They broke camp efficiently, Abram loading his gear onto his horse, Pepper, while Zarah tended to her own mount, a steady gray mare named Birch. He noticed she moved with more caution today, wincing occasionally as she adjusted her position in the saddle. Are you well enough to ride? He asked. I'll manage, she said firmly, but an hour into their journey, Abram saw her face contort with pain as they navigated a particularly rough stretch of terrain. Without comment, he directed them toward a small stream where they could rest. The baby's been restless since Thomas. She trailed off, rubbing her side. I think it senses my distress. Abram had no experience with expectant mothers, but he'd helped deliver enough foals and calves to know that stress wasn't good for mother or offspring. Tell me about Oregon, he suggested, hoping to distract her with more pleasant thoughts. What kind of place were you and Thomas planning to build? The question worked. As they continued their journey, Zarah described the home they'd planned a modest cabin at first, but with room to expand as their family grew. Thomas had skills as a carpenter, and they'd dreamed of a wraparound porch where they could watch sunsets together. He used to say we'd have rocking chairs out there when we were old and gray, watching our grandchildren play in the yard, she said, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. Then her expression clouded. I don't know how I'll manage alone. One step at a time, Abram advised. Fort Benton first. They made camp that evening in the shelter of a rocky overhang. After they'd eaten and Abram had checked the horses, he found Zarah staring into the fire, lost in thought. May I ask what brought you out this way, Mr. Nolan? You mentioned business in Fort Benton. Abram hesitated, then decided honesty was best. I've been tracking a man, a former friend who stole something valuable from my family. You're not a bounty hunter? Alarm flickered across her face. No, madam, just a rancher with a score to settle. My father died last year, and this man took advantage of our grief to steal a deed to land that's been in our family for generations. Abram poked at the fire with a stick. The law in Butte wasn't interested in helping, so I decided to handle it myself. And when you find this man, I aim to recover what's mine, nothing more. He met her eyes. I'm not a violent man by nature, Mrs. Reed. Zarah seemed to accept this. Please, call me Zarah. Mrs. Reed reminds me too much of what I've lost. Zarah, then. And I'm Abram. They fell into a companionable silence as the stars emerged overhead, brilliant against the vast Montana sky. For the first time in days, Zarah's face was peaceful as she gazed upward. Thomas loved the stars, she said softly. He knew all the constellations, said they'd guide us west. Abram followed her gaze. My father taught me to navigate by them, said a man who knows the stars is never truly lost. Were you close to your father? Very. He taught me everything I know about ranching, horses, being a man. Abram's throat tightened unexpectedly. Losing him was like losing my compass. Zarah nodded in understanding. That's how I feel now. Adrift. Before they retired for the night, Abram checked on the horses one final time and found Zarah's mare favoring her right front leg. A closer inspection revealed a stone bruise that would worsen if ridden on. Birch needs rest, he told Zarah when he returned to the fire. We can double up on Pepper until we reach the next settlement. There's a trading post about a day's ride from here where we might find another mount. The next morning brought clear skies, but a new challenge. With Zarah seated in front of Abram on Pepper, her pregnancy made for an awkward arrangement. Every jolt of the trail brought her back against his chest, and he found himself increasingly aware of her scent, a mixture of wildflowers and something uniquely feminine despite days on the trail. He kept his arms carefully around her, only as necessary to hold the reins, but even this modest contact felt intimate in a way that made him uneasy. For her part, Zarah maintained a dignified silence, though he could feel how she stiffened with each rough patch of trail. By midday, he could sense her exhaustion. "There's a spot up ahead where we can rest," he said, more gruffly than intended. The spot turned out to be a small valley cradling a crystal-clear spring surrounded by cottonwoods. Abram helped Zarah dismount, trying to ignore the warmth of her skin beneath his hands and the way her breath caught when he lifted her down. "It's beautiful here," she said, gazing around at the unexpected oasis. Abram nodded. "Found it years ago on a cattle drive. Always stop when I'm in these parts." While Pepper drank and grazed, they shared a simple meal. Zarah seemed more at ease here, away from the grave and the memories of Thomas's final days. She asked about Abram's ranch, and he found himself describing the valley his grandfather had claimed back in '45, the house his father had expanded, and the herds he now managed with his younger brother, Caleb. "It sounds wonderful," Zarah said wistfully. "A real home." "It is that," Abram agreed, suddenly homesick for the first time in weeks. "Though lonely at times, just me and Caleb rattling around in that big house now that Pa's gone." "No wife?" Zarah asked, then blushed. "Forgive me, that's not my business." Abram smiled slightly. "No need for forgiveness, and no wife. Came close once, but she decided a rancher's life was too isolated. Married the banker's son instead." "Her loss," Zarah said with surprising firmness, then looked embarrassed again. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Abram didn't dare name. Then Zarah winced and pressed a hand to her side. "The baby?" he asked, concern replacing whatever had been building. She nodded. "Just kicking. Here." Without thinking, she reached for his hand and placed it against her belly. Abram froze, overwhelmed by the intimacy of the gesture, but then he felt it a strong, defiant kick against his palm. His eyes widened. "That's something," he managed, awed despite himself. Zarah smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile he'd seen from her. "He or she is strong, like their father." Her smile faltered. "Thomas was so excited about becoming a father." Abram gently withdrew his hand. "He would be proud of your courage." They continued their journey after the rest, and by nightfall reached the trading post Abram had mentioned. It was little more than a rough cabin with attached stables, but the proprietor, a grizzled old trapper named Harlan, welcomed them warmly. "Mrs. Reed needs rest," Abram explained after introductions. "And we're looking to purchase or rent another horse." Harlan looked at Zarah's condition and nodded. "Got a clean room and back my daughter uses when she visits. It's yours, madam, and I've got a steady gelding might suit. Nothing fancy but sound." The arrangement made, Zarah retired to the room, while Abram and Harlan discussed terms for the horse. Once business was concluded, Harlan poured 2 fingers of whiskey for each of them. "Your wife's in a delicate way to be traveling," the old man observed. "She's not my wife," Abram corrected quickly. "Her husband died on the trail. I'm escorting her to Fort Benton." Harlan raised a bushy eyebrow, but didn't comment further. Instead, he shared the latest news from the territory's rumors of gold in the Black Hills, bringing trouble with the Sioux, a stage robbery near Helena, the usual tales of frontier life. "Been some trouble up Fort Benton way too," Harlan mentioned. "Fella came through here a few days back, talking big about a land deal he'd made. Had papers for prime riverside property he claimed to have won in a card game." Abram stilled. "This man, dark hair, scar along his jaw?" Harlan nodded. "That's the one. Called himself James Westfield, but I've known him as other names before. Not a man I'd trust." "Neither would I," Abram said grimly. "Those papers he's so proud of were stolen from my family." Understanding dawned on Harlan's weathered face. "Figured him for a crook. If you're tracking him, you're about 3 days behind." Abram nodded his thanks for the information. "We'll leave at first light." The next morning, Zarah emerged from her room, looking better rested than she had in days. Harlan's daughter had left behind some clothing that, with modifications, fit over Zarah's growing belly, and she'd clearly taken the opportunity to wash properly. "You look—" Abram paused, searching for an appropriate word. "Refreshed." Zarah tucked a strand of honey-colored hair behind her ear. "Amazing what clean water and a real bed can do." Harlan had prepared a hearty breakfast, and as they ate, Abram explained the news about James Westfield. We're closer to him than I thought, he concluded. Once we reach Fort Benton, I'll need to move quickly. Zarah nodded slowly. I understand. You've already delayed your pursuit to help me. I don't regret it, he said simply. With the new horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding Harlan called Rusty, they made good time that day. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they approached the Missouri River, but Zarah handled her mount with surprising skill. My father kept horses, she explained when Abram commented on it. I grew up riding almost before I could walk. It was one of the things Thomas and I bonded over when we first met. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon. Storm coming, Abram observed. We should find shelter before it hits. They diverted from their course, heading toward a line of bluffs where Abram hoped to find a cave or overhang. The wind picked up, bringing with it the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. There! Zarah pointed toward a dark opening in the bluff face. Is that a cave? It was indeed a shallow cave, just deep enough to provide shelter from the coming storm. They hurried to unload the horses and secure them under a nearby ledge just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Inside the cave, Abram built a small fire near the entrance where the smoke could escape. The storm arrived in earnest. Sheets of rain obscuring the landscape beyond the cave mouth. Lightning split the sky, followed by crashes of thunder that made the ground tremble. I've always loved storms, Zarah said, watching the display from their shelter. There's something cleansing about them. Abram glanced at her, struck by the way the firelight played across her features. With her hair loose around her shoulders and color returned to her cheeks, she looked younger, more vibrant than the grieving widow he'd found digging a grave. As if sensing his thoughts, she turned to meet his gaze. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them charged like the storm outside. Then Zarah looked away, her hand moving protectively to her belly. Tell me more about your ranch, she said, clearly seeking safer conversation. Abram obliged, describing the rhythms of ranch life through the seasons: spring calving, summer grazing in high mountain pastures, fall roundups, and the quiet isolation of winter. As he spoke, he realized how much he missed it, how the pursuit of Westfield had taken him from the land he loved. It sounds like home, Zarah said when he finished. A real home, with roots and purpose. It is, Abram agreed, though it needs a woman's touch. Has since my mother passed. The storm raged through the night, but inside the cave, they were dry and relatively comfortable. Abram kept the fire burning, watching as Zarah finally succumbed to exhaustion and fell asleep, her features softened in repose. He found himself wondering what circumstances had shaped her, what kind of strength it took to endure what she had and still press forward. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world glittering with raindrops. They set out early, both aware they were drawing closer to Fort Benton and the moment their paths might diverge. What will you do when you confront Westfield? Zarah asked as they rode side by side. Abram considered his answer carefully. Ideally, I'll recover the deed without violence, but Westfield isn't known for being reasonable. You won't kill him? Her voice was steady, but he heard the concern beneath it. That's not my intention, but I won't let him keep what belongs to my family either. He looked at her directly. Does that trouble you? Zarah was quiet for a moment. I've seen enough death lately to last a lifetime, but I also understand protecting what's yours. She met his eyes. Just be careful, Abram. The use of his given name, spoken with genuine concern, affected him more than he cared to admit. I will, he promised. They made camp that night by a small stream, their last before reaching Fort Benton. As Abram prepared their meal, he noticed Zarah writing in a small journal she'd taken from her pack. Letters to the baby, she explained when she caught him looking, so he or she will know their father someday, who he was, what he dreamed of. That's a fine idea, Abram said, genuinely touched by the gesture. Zarah closed the journal, tucking it away. I worry sometimes that I'll forget the sound of Thomas's voice, the exact shade of his eyes. Writing helps preserve those memories. How long were you married? Just over a year. We knew each other for 6 months before that. She smiled sadly. Not long enough to build a lifetime of memories. But I'm grateful for the time we had. Abram handed her a plate of beans and salt pork. He must have been a good man to win your heart. He was kind, hard-working, full of dreams. She ate a few bites before adding, "But I think perhaps I didn't know him completely. Marriage reveals aspects of a person courtship keeps hidden." "How so?" Abram asked, curious. Zarah considered her words carefully. "Thomas was easily discouraged when things didn't go as planned. He had a temper sometimes." She looked up quickly. "He never raised a hand to me, but he could be dark with melancholy when faced with setbacks." Abram nodded, understanding. "The trail tests a person's true character." "Yes," she agreed. "I sometimes wondered if Oregon would have been the answer he thought it would be. If anything would have satisfied his restlessness." They fell silent, each lost in thought as the first stars appeared overhead. When Zarah finally spoke again, her voice was so soft, Abram had to lean forward to hear. "What if I can't do this alone, Abram? What if I'm not strong enough to build the life Thomas wanted for us?" The vulnerability in her question struck him deeply. "From what I've seen, Zarah, you're stronger than you know. And the life you build doesn't have to be exactly what Thomas envisioned. It can be what you want for yourself and your child." She looked at him, eyes luminous in the firelight. "Thank you for that, and for everything you've done." "No need for thanks between friends," he replied. The word friends hung between them, somehow inadequate for the connection that had formed over their days together, yet safer than acknowledging anything deeper. The next day they reached Fort Benton by mid-afternoon. The settlement sprawled along the Missouri River, a busy port where steamboats from St. Louis unloaded supplies and took on furs, gold, and cattle bound for eastern markets. After days on the trail, the activity and noise of the town seemed overwhelming. Abram led them to a modest hotel where he secured 2 rooms. "You should rest," he told Zarah. "I'll make inquiries about Westfield." "Be careful," she reminded him, concern evident in her expression. "Always am," he assured her, with more confidence than he felt. Fort Benton's saloons yielded the information he sought within hours. Westfield had been in town for 2 days, bragging about the prime riverfront property he'd acquired and seeking investors for a grand development scheme. He was currently staying at the River Palace, the town's most expensive hotel, using Abram's family money to fund his luxurious accommodations. By nightfall, Abram had a plan. Rather than confronting Westfield directly, he would meet with the town's attorney in the morning. The stolen deed might have Westfield's forged signature, but it would also bear the Nolan family seal proof of its rightful ownership. He returned to the hotel to find Zarah waiting anxiously in the lobby. "I was worried," she admitted. "You've been gone for hours." "Just gathering information," he assured her. "Have you eaten?" She shook her head, and he escorted her to the hotel's dining room. Over a meal far better than trail rations, he explained his plan. "It sounds safer than confronting him directly," Zarah agreed, relief evident in her voice. "When will you meet the attorney?" "First thing tomorrow." Abram hesitated. "I've been thinking about your situation. Fort Benton has a good doctor, as I mentioned. It might be wise for you to stay here until after the baby comes." Zarah's hand stilled on her cutlery. "And then what? Continue to Oregon alone with an infant?" "I didn't say that was your only option." Abram met her eyes. "My ranch isn't far from here, 4 days' ride in good weather. You'd be welcome there, for as long as you need, until you decide what you want to do next." Surprise registered on her face. "You'd do that for me? Take in a widow and another man's child?" "I would," he said simply. "You'd have your own cabin, the foreman's old place. It's small but sound. No one would think anything improper." He rushed to clarify his intentions. "It would just be a safe place to land for a while." Zarah studied him, her expression unreadable. "That's very generous, Abram. But why would you make such an offer to someone you barely know?" The question demanded honesty. "Because in the short time I've known you, I've come to respect your courage and determination. Because no one should face what you're facing alone." He paused, then added more quietly, "And because I think you'd bring something my ranch has been missing, life, purpose beyond just work and survival." Color rose in Zarah's cheeks, but before she could respond, a commotion erupted in the hotel lobby, raised voices, then the crash of breaking glass. Abram rose immediately, instinctively placing himself between Zarah and whatever danger might be approaching. A moment later, a man staggered into the dining room, clearly intoxicated and belligerent. Abram recognized him instantly, James Westfield, the man he'd been tracking for weeks. Westfield's gaze swept the room until it landed on Abram. Recognition flashed in his bloodshot eyes. "Nolan," he slurred. "Heard you were looking for me?" Abram stepped forward, keeping his voice level. "We have business to discuss, Westfield, but not here and not when you're in this state." Westfield sneered. "Scared to face me, ranch boy? Afraid I'll tell everyone how your daddy lost that land fair and square in a card game he had no business playing?" "That's a lie, and you know it," Abram said coldly. "You stole that deed while my family was burying my father." Westfield's hand moved to his hip where a pistol was holstered. The remaining diners hurriedly vacated their tables, sensing the danger. Only Zarah remained, her eyes wide with alarm. "Zarah, go to your room," Abram said without turning. "Yes, run along, little lady," Westfield mocked. "Men's business here." Instead, Zarah stood, moving to Abram's side. "Mr. Westfield, my husband died of fever just days ago. I've had my fill of death. Whatever dispute you have with Mr. Nolan can surely be resolved without violence." Something in her calm dignity seemed to penetrate Westfield's drunken haze. His hand hesitated over his weapon. "The lady has the right of it," came a new voice from the doorway. The town sheriff stepped into the room, hand on his own pistol. "This establishment doesn't take kindly to brawling, Westfield. I suggest you head back to your hotel and sleep it off." Westfield glared at Abram. "This isn't over, Nolan." "No, it isn't," Abram agreed. "But it will be, soon." With a final threatening look, Westfield allowed the sheriff to escort him out. As the tension in the room dissipated, Abram turned to Zarah. "You shouldn't have done that. He's dangerous." "So is childbirth, but women face it every day," she replied with unexpected spirit. "Besides, I meant what I said. I've seen enough death." Abram shook his head, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "You're either the bravest or the most foolhardy woman I've ever met." "Perhaps a bit of both," she admitted. They finished their meal in relative silence, both shaken by the encounter. As Abram walked Zarah to her room afterward, she paused at the door. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said, "to stay at your ranch until the baby comes." Abram nodded, waiting. "It's very kind, but I need to be certain of your expectations. I'm still in mourning, Abram. Still Thomas's wife in my heart, carrying his child." "I understand that," Abram said gently. "My offer comes with no expectations beyond giving you a safe place to welcome your child into the world. Whatever comes after, that would be your decision, your choice." Zarah searched his face, seemingly satisfied with what she found there. "Then I accept, with gratitude. But first, you must resolve this business with Westfield. I won't be the cause of further delay." "Tomorrow," Abram promised. "One way or another, it ends tomorrow." Morning brought clear skies and a sense of resolution. Abram met with Fort Benton's attorney, Stanley Bergman, presenting his case methodically. The family seal on the deed, his father's distinctive signature, and affidavits he'd brought from neighbors back home all supported his claim. "This is quite straightforward," Bergman said after reviewing the evidence. "Mr. Westfield's claim won't stand legal scrutiny. I'll prepare the necessary papers to restore your ownership." "Will he face charges for the theft?" Abram asked. Bergman sighed. "Possibly, though frontier justice can be unpredictable. The important thing is securing your property rights." By noon, Abram had the papers in hand that nullified Westfield's claim and reaffirmed the Nolan family ownership. His next stop was the River Palace, where he learned Westfield had checked out hastily that morning. "Said he had urgent business downriver," the clerk informed him, "left on the morning steamboat." Disappointment and relief warred in Abram's chest. He'd wanted to confront Westfield directly, to see the man face the consequences of his actions, but the legal resolution was what truly mattered. The land was secure once more. He returned to their hotel to find Zarah waiting anxiously. When he explained what had happened, she seemed relieved. "So it's over? Truly over?" "The land is safe," Abram confirmed, though Westfield escaped any real punishment. "Men like that usually create their own punishment eventually," Zarah observed. And you achieved what you set out to do without bloodshed. Abram nodded, realizing she was right. We can leave for the ranch tomorrow if you're feeling strong enough for the journey. I am, she assured him, though I should visit the doctor here first, as you suggested. The doctor, a gruff but competent older man named Dr. Mason, examined Zarah thoroughly while Abram waited outside. When she emerged, her expression was one of cautious optimism. He says the baby and I are healthy, despite the rigors of the trail. He estimates another 2 to 3 months before the birth. She hesitated, then added, he also suggested I not travel beyond Fort Benton after another month has passed. The final weeks are unpredictable, he said. Then we'll make sure you're settled at the ranch well before then, Abram promised. We'll leave at first light. That evening, they dined together again, making plans for the journey. Abram found himself describing the ranch in greater detail, the layout of the house, the rhythm of the seasons, the neighbors who lived within riding distance. It sounds peaceful, Zarah remarked. After everything that's happened, peace sounds like a blessing. It can be lonely too, Abram admitted, especially in winter when the snow makes travel difficult. I'm accustomed to keeping my own company, she assured him, and soon I'll have the baby for companionship as well. Later, as he walked her to her room, a comfortable silence settled between them. At her door, Zarah hesitated. Abram, I want you to know how grateful I am, not just for your help, but for seeing me, truly seeing me when I was at my lowest moment. Her eyes met his. That day, at the grave, I thought my life was ending along with Thomas's. You reminded me that it wasn't. Impulsively, she rose on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek, a fleeting gesture of gratitude that nonetheless left his skin burning where her lips had touched. Good night, Zarah, he managed, his voice rougher than intended. Good night, she replied softly before disappearing into her room. Abram stood there longer than necessary, his hand unconsciously touching the spot she had kissed, aware that something fundamental had shifted between them, something neither was ready to name, but that existed nonetheless, a possibility for the future once grief had run its course. The journey to Abram's ranch took 4 days as predicted, following the Missouri River before turning north into rolling grasslands cradled by distant mountains. With each mile, Abram felt the tension of the past weeks easing, replaced by the familiar comfort of heading home. Zarah, too, seemed to gain strength as they traveled, her body adapting to the rhythm of the trail despite her advanced pregnancy. She asked thoughtful questions about ranching, clearly preparing herself for the new environment she would be entering. Will your brother be surprised when you return with company? She asked on the 3rd day. Abram chuckled. Caleb's not easily surprised, but yes, I expect he'll have questions. He's younger than me, just 24, but steady as they come. And he won't mind having a widow and soon-to-be infant living on the property? Caleb has a generous heart, Abram assured her, and enough sense to understand your situation. Late in the afternoon of the 4th day, they crested a hill, and the Nolan ranch spread before them a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney, several outbuildings, corrals, and in the distance, cattle grazing on lush grassland. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, signaling Caleb was home. It's beautiful, Zarah breathed, taking in the vista. Like something from a painting. Pride swelled in Abram's chest. It's not fancy, but it's solid, built to last generations. As they approached, Caleb emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the late afternoon sun. When he recognized Abram, he broke into a wide grin and jogged toward them. About time you showed your ugly face around here, he called, then faltered slightly when he noticed Zarah. And you brought company. Abram dismounted, clasping his brother in a quick embrace before helping Zarah down from her horse. Caleb, this is Mrs. Zarah Reed. She'll be staying with us for a while. Zarah, my brother Caleb. Understanding dawned on Caleb's face as he took in Zarah's condition. To his credit, he merely tipped his hat respectfully. Madam, you're most welcome at Nolan Ranch. Any friend of Abram's is family to us. Thank you, Zarah replied warmly. Your brother has been very kind to me during a difficult time. While Caleb took the horses to the stable, Abram showed Zarah to the foreman's cabin, a small but well-built structure with 2 rooms, situated about 50 yards from the main house. It had stood empty since their previous foreman had left to start his own ranch the year before. It needs a woman's touch, Abram admitted as they entered. The cabin was clean but sparse, with simple furniture and few comforts. But the roof doesn't leak, the stove works well, and we can bring whatever you need from the main house. Zarah walked slowly around the space, running her hand over the rough-hewn table, peering into the small bedroom. "It's perfect," she declared. "A place of my own, where I can prepare for the baby. We'll bring linens and supplies," Abram promised, "and you'll take your meals with us at the main house, at least until the baby comes." That evening, the three of them shared a hearty meal prepared by Caleb, who proved to be surprisingly accomplished in the kitchen. As they ate, Abram explained how he had encountered Zarah and the circumstances that had brought her to the ranch. He also shared the successful resolution of the Westfield situation. "So, the deed is secure?" Caleb confirmed, relief evident in his voice. "Legally binding and registered properly," Abram assured him. "The North Pasture is Nolan land, as it should be." Later, after Zarah had retired to her cabin with promises to call if she needed anything during the night, Caleb regarded his older brother thoughtfully over a cup of coffee. "She's a fine woman," he observed. "Been through a lot." Abram nodded. "Too much for someone so young, but she's strong." "And pretty," Caleb added with a hint of mischief, "even in her condition." "Caleb," Abram warned, "she's a widow, still grieving, and expecting another man's child." Caleb raised his hands in surrender. "I'm just making an observation, brother. Not suggesting anything improper." He sipped his coffee. "Though the way you look at her suggests you've made the same observation yourself." Abram didn't reply, which was answer enough for Caleb, who wisely changed the subject to ranch matters that needed attention. Over the following weeks, Zarah settled into life at Nolan Ranch with surprising ease. True to her word, she brought life to the place in ways Abram hadn't anticipated. She planted flowers around her cabin, hung curtains in the windows, and even began a small vegetable garden with Caleb's enthusiastic assistance. At first, she insisted on contributing to the household by mending clothes and helping with meals. But as her pregnancy advanced, both Nolan brothers firmly insisted she rest more. Instead, she began keeping the ranch's accounts, discovering errors that had cost them money, and implementing a more efficient system. "You have a head for figures," Abram remarked one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house watching the sunset. "My father taught me," she explained. "He believed women should understand business as well as men do. Said it was the only way to ensure you're never taken advantage of." "Wise man," Abram said. Then, after a comfortable silence, "Are you happy here, Zarah? Truly?" She considered the question thoughtfully. "I am, more than I expected to be. There are still moments when grief overwhelms me, when I think of Thomas and the future we planned." Her hand rested on her now prominent belly. "But those moments come less frequently now. And I've found contentment here, safety." Abram nodded, understanding. It wasn't a declaration of anything beyond gratitude and peace, but it was enough for now. They had time for her to heal, time for him to understand his own growing feelings, time for whatever might develop between them to do so naturally, without pressure. As her 8th month of pregnancy approached, Zarah's energy waned. Dr. Mason from Fort Benton made a special trip to the ranch to check on her, declaring both mother and baby healthy, but advising even more rest in the coming weeks. "The baby is dropped," he explained to Abram afterward. "It could come any time in the next 3 to 4 weeks. Someone should stay close by." Abram immediately arranged for Maria Gonzalez, the wife of a neighboring rancher, to come stay at the ranch. Maria had helped deliver many babies and would know what to do when the time came. Maria arrived the next day, a sturdy woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner that immediately set Zarah at ease. She moved into the second bedroom of the foreman's cabin and took charge of Zarah's care with gentle efficiency. "First babies often take their time," she assured Abram when he expressed concern over Zarah's increasing discomfort. "But when it decides to come, it will come quickly. Don't worry, Senor. I have delivered many healthy children." The days stretched into a week, then 2. Zarah grew increasingly uncomfortable but maintained her spirit, spending hours in the rocking chair Abram had crafted for her, working on a small quilt for the baby or writing in her journal. Abram found himself inventing reasons to visit the cabin, bringing fresh flowers or books from the main house, checking that the woodpile was stocked, or simply stopping by to see if Zarah needed anything. Each time, her face would light up at his arrival, a reaction that gave him hope for a future he now desperately wanted. One evening, as summer transitioned to early fall, Abram sat with Zarah on the small porch of her cabin. The air was cool but pleasant, filled with the scent of pine from the surrounding forest. "I've been thinking about names," Zarah said, her hands resting on her belly. Thomas wanted to name a boy after his father, William. For a girl, he favored Elizabeth, after his mother. Abram nodded. "Good, strong names." "Yes," Zarah agreed. "But lately I've been considering other possibilities as well." She hesitated, then added softly, "If it's a boy, perhaps Thomas as a middle name rather than a first. A way to honor him without the child having to carry the weight of being named directly for someone they'll never know." "That seems wise," Abram said carefully, sensing there was more she wanted to say. Zarah turned to face him more directly. "Abram, these past months, you've shown me such kindness, such respect. You've given me space to grieve while also helping me find a way forward." She took a deep breath. "I need you to know that, while I'll always cherish Thomas's memory, my heart isn't sealed in his grave." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Abram reached for her hand, enveloping it in both of his. "Zarah, A sharp gasp from Zarah interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. Her free hand pressed against her side, her face contorting in pain. "The baby?" he asked, instantly alert. She nodded, trying to catch her breath as the contraction passed. "I've been having twinges all day, but that was different." Abram was on his feet immediately. "I'll get Maria." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of anxiety and helpless waiting for Abram. Maria banished both Nolan brothers from the cabin, sending them to the main house with firm instructions to stay out of the way. Caleb tried to distract Abram with card games and ranch talk, but Abram's attention remained fixed on the cabin, where occasionally they could hear Zarah's cries. "She'll be fine," Caleb assured him repeatedly. "Maria knows what she's doing." "I know," Abram replied each time, but the worry remained. Dawn was breaking when a different cry pierced the early morning stillness, the unmistakable wail of a newborn. Abram was on his feet instantly, halfway to the door, before Caleb caught his arm. "Give them a few minutes, brother," he advised. "Maria will call when they're ready." Those minutes stretched like hours, but finally Maria appeared at the main house, her weathered face wreathed in smiles. "A healthy girl," she announced. "And the mother is well, just tired. You may see them now, senor." Abram practically ran to the cabin, pausing at the bedroom door to catch his breath before entering. Inside, Zarah reclined against pillows, her face pale but radiant with exhaustion and joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in the quilt she had made. "Abram," she said softly, looking up at him, "come meet Elizabeth Thomas Reed." He approached slowly, almost reverently, looking down at the tiny face peeking from the blanket. The baby had a dusting of dark hair and her mother's delicate features. "She's beautiful," he whispered, "like her mother." Zarah's eyes filled with tears. "Would you like to hold her?" With trembling hands, Abram accepted the precious bundle, cradling the newborn with more care than he'd ever shown anything in his life. Elizabeth made a small sound, her tiny fist escaping the blanket. "Hello, Elizabeth," he murmured. "Welcome to the world." When he looked up, Zarah was watching him with an expression that made his heart swell. There was trust there, and something more, something that looked remarkably like love. The weeks following Elizabeth's birth established a new rhythm at the Nolan ranch. Zarah recovered her strength quickly, and the baby thrived under her mother's care and the doting attention of both Nolan brothers. Maria stayed for 2 weeks before returning to her own family, satisfied that all was well. Abram found himself increasingly drawn to the domestic scene at the foreman's cabin. He would finish his ranch work and immediately seek out Zarah and Elizabeth, bringing small gifts, a carved wooden rattle for the baby, wildflowers for Zarah, books he thought she might enjoy. One crisp October evening, as Elizabeth slept soundly in her cradle, Abram and Zarah sat before the fireplace in her cabin. They had fallen into the habit of sharing this quiet time together each day, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. "I received a letter today," Zarah said, breaking one such silence. "From Thomas's brother in Oregon." Abram tensed slightly. "Oh?" "I wrote to him after Elizabeth was born, to let him know of her arrival and Thomas's passing." She smoothed her skirt. "He's invited us to come to Oregon, says we'd be welcome on his homestead." Abram felt as if the ground had suddenly fallen away beneath him. "I see," he managed. "And are you considering it?" Zarah's eyes met his. "I was, at first. It seemed like the path I should follow, for Thomas's sake." She paused. "But then I realized something important. Thomas is gone, and while I'll always honor his memory, my decisions now must be based on what's best for Elizabeth and for me, not on a dream that was largely his." Hope flickered in Abram's chest. "And what do you think is best?" "Stability, security." Her voice softened. "Love." Abram set aside his coffee cup and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Zarah, I've tried to give you time and space to grieve, to find your way, but I can't pretend any longer that my feelings for you are simply those of a friend." He drew a deep breath. "I love you. I think I started falling in love with you that first day, watching you fight to give your husband a proper burial despite your own condition. Your strength, your grace, your kindness, they've captured my heart completely." Tears glistened in Zarah's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "And I love you, Abram Nolan. I wasn't looking for love again so soon, but it found me anyway." Her voice caught. "Is it wrong, do you think, to open my heart again when Thomas has been gone only months?" "No," Abram said firmly. "Love isn't disloyal to his memory. It's honoring the life he would want for you and for his daughter." He squeezed her hands gently. "Stay, Zarah. Not in the foreman's cabin, but as my wife. Let me be a father to Elizabeth, and perhaps someday give her brothers and sisters to grow up with here on the land that will be their inheritance." Zarah's answer was to lean forward and press her lips to his, a kiss that held promise and passion and the certainty of a future together. When they finally parted, both breathless, she whispered, "Yes, Abram, yes to everything." They were married 2 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Caleb standing as witness and baby, Elizabeth cradled in her mother's arms throughout. The local preacher from Fort Benton made the journey specially, pronouncing them husband and wife as the autumn sun cast golden light across the land they would share. That evening, after Elizabeth was settled in her cradle in what was now their bedroom in the main house, Abram took Zarah's hand and led her onto the porch. The first stars were appearing in the twilight sky, and in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. "Happy?" he asked, drawing her into his embrace. Zarah leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "More than I ever thought possible again." She looked up at him. "When you found me that day, digging that grave, I thought my life was ending. I couldn't imagine a future without Thomas. Couldn't see beyond my grief and fear." "And now?" Abram prompted. "Now I see everything clearly," she said, her eyes reflecting the emerging stars. "I see our home, our family growing, years unfolding with joy, and yes, challenges too, but facing them together." She touched his face tenderly. "You gave me back my future, Abram, and I promise to make every day of it count." Abram kissed her then, sealing their new beginning with a promise of his own to cherish and protect her and Elizabeth, to build the life they both now dreamed of, to be the husband and father his family deserved. Above them, the Montana sky deepened to indigo, stars multiplying until they blanketed the heavens. On the land that had been in Abram's family for generations, new life had taken root not just in the form of baby Elizabeth, but in the love that had grown from an unexpected meeting on a desolate stretch of trail where a cowboy had found a pregnant woman trying to dig a grave and had said the words that would change both their lives forever. "You'll rest. I'll finish." 5 years later, Abram stood on that same porch, watching as Zarah moved through the garden with 4-year-old Elizabeth and 2-year-old James. His daughter's dark curls bounced as she carefully carried water to the tomato plants, mimicking her mother's movements with solemn concentration. James, more interested in the grasshopper he'd discovered than in gardening, squatted nearby, his chubby hands cupped around his find. The sound of a rider approaching drew Abram's attention. Caleb, returning from Fort Benton with supplies and, judging by his broad smile, good news. Abram descended the porch steps to meet his brother. "Well?" he asked as Caleb dismounted. "It's official," Caleb announced. "The railroad will come through the northern edge of our property. We'll have the spur line and loading pens we wanted." Zarah, having heard the news, joined them, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's wonderful. It will make getting the cattle to market so much easier." "And more profitable," Caleb added with a grin. "The Nolan ranch is going to prosper like never before." Abram slipped his arm around Zarah's waist, drawing her close. "We're already richer than I ever dreamed possible," he said, looking at his family with undisguised love. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Abram and Zarah walked to the small rise behind the house, where they often went to watch the sun set. The grass was lush beneath their feet, dotted with late summer wildflowers. "I have something to tell you," Zarah said as they reached the crest, her expression both shy and pleased. Abram raised an eyebrow. "More good news?" She nodded, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach. "Dr. Mason confirmed it yesterday when the children and I were in town. By spring, there will be another Nolan at the ranch." Joy surged through Abram as he gathered his wife in his arms, lifting her feet off the ground in his enthusiasm. "Another baby! James will be so excited to have a younger sibling to boss around." Zarah laughed, the sound as clear and beautiful as it had been the first time he'd heard it. "Elizabeth is already making plans for teaching the baby everything she knows." As they stood together, watching the sun sink below the mountains, Abram reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from that first meeting beside a grave, through grief and healing, to the building of a life richer than either had imagined possible. "What are you thinking?" Zarah asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking about fate," he replied, "about how sometimes the most painful moments can lead to the greatest joys." He touched her cheek gently. "About how grateful I am that I found you that day, even though I wasn't looking for anything except a thief and a stolen deed." "And I found you," Zarah reminded him, "when I was looking only for the strength to bury my past and somehow face my future alone." She leaned into his embrace. "Instead, I found a new beginning, a new love, a family." As darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, they made their way back to the house, the home they had built together, not just of logs and stone, but of love and trust and shared dreams. Behind them, the vast Montana landscape stretched into shadow, and ahead, lights glowed warmly in windows that promised shelter and belonging. Inside, their children slept peacefully, and the promise of a new life grew beneath Zarah's heart, the continuation of a story that had begun with an act of simple human kindness on a lonely stretch of trail, where a cowboy had offered rest to a grieving woman, and in doing so, had changed both their destinies forever.